Good evening. Tonight we delve into the significant implications of Donald Trump's recent executive order to reevaluate and realign U.S. foreign aid, particularly focusing on African countries. This isn't just about numbers on a balance sheet, it's about the lives of millions of people across the African continent who rely on this aid for survival, for education, for a future. We're talking about hospitals that might have to close their doors, about children who might not be able to go to school, about entire communities left vulnerable to disease and poverty. Over the next few minutes, we're going to examine the potential consequences of this executive order, the human cost of this policy shift, and what it means for the future of U.S. relations with Africa. Across Africa, a sense of unease, a feeling of being left in the lurch. The Trump administration's order has triggered immediate concern, with many African nations heavily reliant on U.S. aid left wondering about the fate of vital programs. These aren't just abstract line items in a budget, we're talking about life-saving initiatives, anti-malaria campaigns, HIV/AIDS prevention and treatment programs, agricultural initiatives helping farmers feed their families, all hanging in the balance. The uncertainty itself is a threat, casting a shadow over the continent. The Trump administration has made it clear America's interests are paramount. But what does that mean for countries depending on U.S. aid? The message is stark. Align with our foreign policy objectives or risk losing crucial support. It's a transactional approach to foreign aid, one that raises serious ethical questions. Can we put a price tag on humanitarian assistance? Is saving lives now contingent on strategic alliances? These are the uncomfortable questions being asked in the wake of this executive order. Let's be clear, this isn't theoretical. Kenya, Ethiopia, Nigeria, these nations already grappling with complex challenges are bracing for potentially significant cuts, particularly in healthcare and education. Imagine being a doctor in a rural clinic, already stretched thin, facing the prospect of losing the funding you need to keep your doors open. Imagine being a teacher in an overcrowded classroom, knowing that the resources you rely on to educate the next generation might soon disappear. This is the reality facing millions across Africa. Let's talk about PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. This program, credited with saving millions of lives, is now facing an uncertain future. Millions of people rely on PEPFAR for access to life-saving antiretroviral drugs, for HIV testing and counseling, for a chance at a healthier future. Cutting funding to such a program isn't just a statistic. It's a death sentence for countless individuals. It's a moral question with very real, very human consequences. The Trump administration argues that this realignment will encourage African nations to become more self-reliant. On the surface, it sounds like a noble goal, but the reality is far more complex. Many African countries are still grappling with the legacies of colonialism, with weak institutions, with corruption, with poverty. Forcing them to suddenly shoulder the burden of development alone could be devastating, potentially reversing years of progress. This shift in U.S. policy has created a void, and other global players are eager to fill it. China, in particular, is aggressively pursuing partnerships across Africa, investing heavily in infrastructure projects and offering loans with fewer strings attached. This raises critical questions about influence and leverage. Will African nations be forced to choose between much-needed development assistance and aligning with U.S. interests? It's a delicate balancing act with far-reaching geopolitical implications. The ultimate impact of Trump's executive order on U.S. foreign aid to Africa remains to be seen. But one thing is certain, the stakes are incredibly high. While the Trump administration argues that this realignment is about putting America's interests first, critics argue that it's a short-sighted approach that could have devastating consequences. African countries are likely to face challenges in maintaining funding for critical programs. This realignment emphasizes U.S. interests, which could lead to significant reductions in aid unless these programs are directly tied to American foreign policy objectives. The shift may push African nations to explore alternative partnerships and funding strategies. The coming months and years will reveal whether this gamble will lead to greater self-reliance or further destabilize a continent already facing immense challenges.